those of you who don't know me, my name is Barb Brenner, and I'm the person leading the canoe trip to Lake Lila, in case you're interested. But the reason why I'm up here is for this. And I love it because there's a slide up here that says Outdoor Expo, something that we're very proud of. And if you think about it, we have been doing the Expo for 21 years, which is totally awesome. And a lot of our heart and soul, this chapter goes into it. And it's a great gift that we give to the community because we charge nothing for it. We have about 40 workshops there and all these outdoor organizations setting up booths. We have canoes to paddle and a ton of workshops that people can attend. But we need your help. It requires quite a few volunteers to make the day happen. How many people have been to the Expo? Raise your hand if you've been to the Expo. Great. How many people have been a volunteer for the Expo? This is your chance to raise your hand next time somebody asks you that question. I'm going to pass around a board. Our volunteer coordinator has asked me to mention that we have 4 volunteer positions we have nobody signed up for, so we need help. One is a workshop host. That's somebody who runs around and just makes sure that there's a presenter at every workshop and that the workshops start on time. Because you never know if a presenter doesn't show up. That would be something we kind of need to know about. And then we need help at the children's table. So if you like to make crafts for little people, and we're only looking for like a 2-hour time slot to have you help us with. We also need help at the volunteer registration table. That's where you stand and you hand out copies of the schedule and give volunteers their name tags and let them know that as a volunteer, you also get to come and join us for lunch. And this year we're doing something different. We'd like to get a little more concrete idea of how many people are coming to the Expo. So we're going to try and count cars and heads that enter the beach parking lot. And so we're looking for 3 people to each take a 2-hour shift, standing up at the entrance of the parking lot and just help us with the count. Because our count right now is kind of a guesstimate. We'd like to make that a little bit more concrete. So if you can help us with the Expo, I'll send this around. Please feel free to sign it. I'll pick it up at the end. And the other announcement for the Outdoor Expo is our flyers are ready to go. So if you're interested in exactly what workshops will be at the Expo, grab one of these flyers on your way out. And the workshop schedule's in the back. On the inside is a description of all the workshops and all of the outdoor organizations that will be joining us. And even better than just grabbing one, grab a stack and take them to some location in Rochester to share with people. There is a clipboard there with a bunch of sign-ups of different places that we need to deliver these to. So come and join us. Oh, what's the date? What's today's date? May 9th, right? Add a month onto that and you get June 9th. That is the day of the Expo, Saturday. And to further help you remember it, because let's need to get out of here, is when is the next chapter meeting? June 6th, add 3 days onto that and you get the Expo. Very good. Thank you.
The upcoming ADVOCACY magazine actually has an article on the Expo, and the next one that you get.
How many of you participated 10 days ago to pick up the parks at Webster Park on a rainy, cold day? I see a couple of hands. We had about 10 people. Well, you have another opportunity. June 2nd, National Trails Day. We're doing trail improvements and improving some of the, we're bringing some switchbacks on some up and down trails at Abraham Lincoln Park. It's a longer day. It starts at 9 in the morning and goes till 2 in the afternoon. So bring a lunch and bring picks, shovels, other tools that would help us relocate portions of a trail. There's no sign up for this. You can see details for the June 2nd event on our website. Simply look at the calendar. Hope to see a lot of you there because there's a lot of work that needs to be done at Abraham Lincoln Park. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Dave Nichols. I'm better known as Jill's husband. Jill is the program. Thank you. Jill is the is the program chair that puts together, for the committee that puts together each of these monthly chapter meetings. The planning session for next year's programs is at our house with a meal on our back deck. You're welcome to come. All you need to do is bring an idea for a program and share it. The date is Wednesday, June 13th. If you need directions or want more information, feel free to contact me or contact my wife, Jill Nichols, the program committee chair. Her email address is in the Genesean. You're welcome to come. Next announcement is, as you've already learned, the next chapter meeting is not the second Wednesday of the month. It's the first Wednesday of the month next month. What's unique about next chapter meeting is that the workshop is actually a gear swap. So at 6:30, everyone's welcome to bring your gear that you'd like to sell or give away, and you're all welcome to come and look through what other people have, and you might find just what you needed or what you really didn't need but you'd like to have anyway. So keep in mind the gear swap at 6:30 at the next chapter meeting. The last announcement is, if you've been participating in the hikes or paddling or any of the various activities that the Genesee Valley chapter puts on, think about who's been leading those, who's been setting those up, and think about nominating one of those people that you see that's always a volunteer for one of the Adirondack Mountain Club's volunteer recognition awards. I have information about the awards. I can also send you information about those. But feel free to contact me, Dave Nichols again. I'm one of the directors of ADK. My email address is also in the Genesean, or my wife, she's also a director, for any information about those. Or you can see me after the meeting as well. Thanks.
One of the YM young members. Nothing official to announce other than we're going to go out to the Yellow Toad afterwards. So if you'd like to join us, you're welcome to. You do not need to feel like you're a young member to go. So we have everybody go, right, Jack?
We do.
So if you feel like coming out to the Yellow Toad afterwards, please join us. Thanks.
In case I forgot to say who I am, I'm Luke Nelson, for those of you who don't know me. We have a couple of positions that we're really looking to fill. One is a webmaster, also a young member chair, and Genesee circulation manager. If you have any interest in those or have any questions on those, feel free to see me. And last but not least, Jack is going to talk about the bookstore.
Is it that time, Luke?
Yes.
Hello, everybody! Well, how many of you were out front for that fabulous paddling workshop? Wow, quite a few. For those of you who were out there and who are eager to obtain more information about various paddles, bookstore authors, the Saranac Paddling Guide book. That's 60 great flat water paddles that authored by Phil Brown. And for those who are interested in Western and Central New York, there is the ADK Canoe Guide to this portion of the state. And finally, a big surprise. So I forgot I had this still in my stock. This book is a famous edition, Adirondack Canoe Waters, North Flow. The reason why this is a nice surprise is because this book has been out of print for a number of years. It still contains highly valuable information about canoe routes, details, portages, all that great stuff. And I have exactly one copy left. So keep it clean when you come over and fight for this book. lucky people will get to take that home. Okay. Would you like to pick a name? Pick a good one. Thanks, Eva. Sherry. Grolick? Grolick, is it? I wasn't certain of the final 2 or 3 letters. That's why I was searching for better lighting. Well, would you like right now, so everyone can watch us. Turn around, Sharon, come on. This is your moment of glory. Look, folks, it's Sharon. Would you like an Adirondack hiking band? A map band? Great. Do you have a favorite color? Hopefully it's not the one that I'm out. Yellow. Like this little guy. Let me come over here and wave it in front of the fans of yours who are sitting out here. And she's picked a yellow high peaks mat bandana. Are you hiking?
I like to, yes.
Have you hiked up in the high peaks?
Yes, I do.
Have you climbed any high peaks?
Just cast view.
What do you mean? It's a great start. You're a tour. You're a tour.
Went to a lot of other places.
Well, that's even better. Well, congratulations, and I hope this map bandana will help you to get up to other people.
All right.
Take care. Thanks, everybody.
Craig McCowan's going to come up and introduce our guest speaker.
Just give us a moment while Brendan sets up his laptop. And then we're going to do a little bit of a different introduction today. I'm going to actually do a little bit back and forth with Brendan because he's got a very interesting background. But I'm not sure I can do justice to it. So we'll work together on it once he gets it set up. Okay, so this is Brendan Wiltse. Brendan and I met about 2 years ago, and we had a common passion, which was the recently purchased Boreas Ponds tract, which is just south of the High Peaks. And we worked together on a project that had to do with that tract. But as I was getting to know Brendan, one of the things I realized is that this isn't the only thing he does. So I guess my first question is, Brendan, how many jobs do you have, and what are they?
I think maybe officially 1, maybe unofficially 2 or 3 others on top of that. Yeah.
So you work with the Ausable River Foundation, and what else?
Sure, yeah. So I'm the Science and Stewardship Director for the Ausable River Association. Sort of my main background is in academia. I have a PhD from Queen's University in paleontechnology. And if anyone knows what that is, congratulations. There's probably 2 of us in the room right now.
And you also worked for the Adirondack Mountain Club, right? And Wes, what else? Do you work for Paul Smith College?
Yep, so I did. I worked for the Adirondack Mountain Club for 9 years. I ran Johns Brook Lodge, and I think I saw a few familiar faces here from my time there. Also worked as a Summit Steward for several seasons, and I teach biostatistics at Paul Smith College.
And I think there's probably about 7 or 8 other things that Brendan's involved with as well, which we probably won't go through. But Brendan's a really impressive guy. He has a really comprehensive knowledge of the Adirondack region, and not just the mountains themselves, but also the people and how policy gets made as far as managing the Adirondack Park. So I think today, what you're going to see from Brendan is how he kind of pulls a lot of the stuff he knows and does together. And one of the great things about it is he can do it with these great visuals. So I will hand the microphone over to you, Brendan, and we really look forward to this.
Great, thank you. So what Craig didn't mention, I don't think, was that I'm also a photographer, and that's sort of what I do from 5 p.m. at night until 9 o'clock the next morning when I have to go back to my regular job. So what I'm going to be speaking about today is sort of my philosophy as a photographer and the work that I've done to advance some conservation goals in the Adirondacks through photography. So as we sort of mentioned, I have these 2 different things that I really focus on in life. And on one side of that is sort of the very fact-based science that I do. I spend a lot of time in all kinds of wonderful weather conditions studying Adirondack lakes and rivers. And the primary things that I do in that work is studying the impact of road salt on our lakes and rivers, the impacts of climate change, and I also have my hands a little bit in some emerging technologies using environmental DNA to map the distribution of fish species. So we can filter water out of a stream, take that back to a lab, and I can tell you what fish live in that stream without ever seeing them. So that's sort of one end of the spectrum, but the other end of the spectrum is something that I'm very passionate about is photography. And I remember the first time I ever took a photograph sort of intentionally. I was lucky enough, my mother is an art teacher, and as a kid, I always wanted to run outside when there were thunderstorms. And my mom obviously would always tell me to get inside. And so one day, though, she taught me how to capture an image like this using a 35mm Minolta camera that she used to capture our family as we were growing up. And, we braced the camera on the railing of our porch, and she showed me the bulb mode and told me if I held my finger down on the shutter while, walked for a few seconds and waited for the lightning to strike and let go, that we might be able to capture that very fleeting moment of a lightning strike that way. In hindsight, I realized that it was a tactic to keep me on and under the porch with my finger on something rather than running around potentially getting struck by lightning. And so that's sort of the other side of what I see, sort of the same spectrum, which is my personal mission and drive in life to conserve the natural world. On one end, we have sort of the science and facts that we need to do to understand how to do that and what the concerns are. And on the other side of that spectrum, what often drives some of the successes in conservation is sort of that more emotional connection that people make to these places that are going to make them care enough to take action based on sort of what science is telling us we need to do to protect them. And I think that maybe we don't appreciate enough the role of the arts in driving the sorts of emotional connections that people have to places. And so that's kind of my story as a photographer. My mission is just to take images that hopefully people can connect with, maybe that they sort of feel something when they see these images. Maybe it's of a place that they've been or they have a connection to already. And if I can share these images, particularly online, and keep folks like yourselves that I'm sure all care about the Adirondacks, that's part of the Adirondack Mountain Club, if I can help keep you all connected to this place that we mutually care about, and I'm lucky enough to live there, then I think that deepens your connection to the Adirondacks, and I think when you then hear of an issue affecting it, you're more likely to take action to protect that place. And if you think about just, not too long ago, it was kind of hard to stay connected to a place like the Adirondacks on a daily basis. But these sort of modern forms of communications that we have, social media, as much as it's sort of blamed for a lot of problems, I think can also be used as something good to keep people connected to these landscapes. So I'm going to share a few stories about projects that I've worked on. It's kind of an example of how photography can be used to aid conservation. But before I get into that, I want to first thank some people and also do a little bit of a shameless plug. I will first want to thank the folks that support me on this platform called Patreon. And I know there's at least 2 of you in the audience today, so thumbs up to you guys, and thanks a lot for that support. And what Patreon is this platform where people can financially support creators. And there's all kinds of amazing people on there, because generally the arts and creativity are undervalued in society, and we don't really have a good way to plug creative people into sort of an economy that supports them. And so the folks that support me on Patreon, you get some perks and sort of bonuses and some insight into what I do in photography and tips and those sorts of things. But they are also the people that make all of the stuff I'm about to talk to you about happen. Because there is a lot of time and effort that goes into this sort of thing. So if you want, check it out. And if you don't want to support me, that's cool, that's fine. Maybe there's some other creative person that you really connect with, and they might be on that platform as well. So when I sort of made the decision that I wanted to start focusing on using photography to build connections between people and places to hopefully aid conservation efforts, the first thing that came to mind was an ecosystem that I'd spent quite a bit of time in, and that was our alpine ecosystems here in New York State. As we mentioned in the introduction, I had the great pleasure of spending 3 seasons as a Summit Steward in this environment, and I knew that there was an opportunity there to take hopefully really good quality images of the plants above tree line, and through that, challenge people when they go visit this environment, not just to look out across the beautiful landscape, but to take a second to look down at their feet as well. And as a Summit Steward, I know that most people don't do that. And that's sort of the job of the Summit Steward program, is to get people to think about the plants and the ecosystem that exists on top of these beautiful mountains. So, I wasn't on this platform, Patreon, when I did this project. I actually just crowdfunded it another way, but I asked people to help me create these images, and that in return, I would give all these images to anyone in any organization, but primarily the Mountain Club, that was working to conserve alpine ecosystems. And so, just to share some of the photographs from this project, this is alpine goldenrod. Goldenrod, I think, gets a bad rap, right? You see it along the sides of roads and fields. Not the same exact species as this one, but there is a species of goldenrod that grows above tree line in our alpine environments. And this is one of the taller flowering plants. It's about 6 to 8 inches. It's kind of as big as it gets, so much smaller than the goldenrod you might see along the side of the road. This little plant here is called mountain sandboard, and it is we refer referred to as a pioneer species in the alpine environment. And the reason referred to as a pioneer species is it's often one of the first plants to grow where no other plants are found. So if you look closely in this image, you'll see running horizontally through the frame a thin crack in the rock. And that's enough to help for the mountain sandbar to get established. There's no soil or anything in that crack, but over time as this plant grows, it'll help establish soil. Mosses will start to move in with it as well, eventually some sedges and rushes, and it will start to build the foundation of that more diverse plant community, all starting with just a tiny little crack in the rock. And this plant, to give you a sense of scale, is about this big in diameter, that full plant there. And then the major part of this project was to photograph the small details of these plants as well, because most people, while they may walk down the trail and say, oh, there's a nice little white flower, and continue along the way, they're probably not going to take the time to really bend over and look at it in detail. And so this is one of the individual flowers photographed using macro photography, and that flower, is maybe about 1 centimeter in diameter. One of my favorite alpine flowers is Lapland rosemary. It's in the rhododendron family. If we were to scale the plant to the sort of rhododendrons that you may have in your yard, this flower would be about up to here on me, from the floor up to my chest. So these plants invest a lot of energy in their flowers, and part of the challenge with photographing, this flower is a little bit larger, it's about that size. Part of the challenge with photographing these sorts of flowers and with macro photography, if anyone has done some photography in the room, is that you have what we call a very shallow depth of field with a macro lens on a camera. So we can only really focus on a thin slice of a flower. It doesn't really get represented super well on this projector here, but there's a lot of detail in that purple area that you would be able to see on a slightly better screen. But this is the sort of image that you can capture with just a single capture of an image with a macro lens. So you notice that only the front edge of the petal is in focus. And so the way we overcome that is something called focus stacking. And we take multiple images of that flower, focusing at different parts along the way, and then combine all of them together to go back to this image that I originally shared with you where the whole flower is in focus. The challenge with this technique, which I employed quite a bit in this project, is that your subject can't move when you're doing this. And I knew this before I started because I had spent a lot of time up there, but it didn't really sink in until I got into it. It seems obvious, like plants don't move around, so this should be pretty simple and easy to do, right? It's not like you're trying to do this with an insect that's crawling around or a small mammal or something. Well, plants do move around quite a bit in the alpine ecosystem. There's hardly a day where there's not a breeze. And so I did everything I could think of to try and stop plants from moving for several weeks, and failed 95% of the time. And you'll notice in this frame that the flower is wet. I found that the best time to photograph these plants was in the rain. And there are a very particular type of rainy day on the summit where it's not really coming down, it's just coming from everywhere. But on those days, it's just this like you're in a cloud and it's sort of misting, there is no wind. And so if you can put up with those conditions, you can get these sort of photographs, and you get the bonus that the water droplets on the plants make a lot of visual appeal on top of that. This is maybe my second favorite alpine plant. Maybe it's my favorite alpine plant, but my second favorite flower. This is Diapensia. And this plant has a unique adaptation where if you notice the little leaflets behind are all intertwined together. So it is a cushion sort of forming plant. And it grows in the windiest locations on the summit. So if you're ever trying to figure out where to eat lunch and you decide you're going to sit down in a location, you might not want to sit next to Diapensia because it's probably going to be pretty windy wherever that location is. And it can grow in these environments because by intertwining its leaves and forming this cushion, it sort of deflects most of that wind. They also have a very thick cuticle on the leaf, and so it prevents the plant from getting desiccated and also helps to retain heat. But they also have these really beautiful little white flowers, again, for a sense of scale. They're about this size. And the nice thing about Diapensia and Lapland Rosebay is they bloom at the same time in early June. So if you go up to Marcy or Algonquin in early June, you'll see sections of the summit covered in these white and pink flowers, which can be really dramatic. There's a lot of plants, alpine plants, that are rare, threatened, or endangered in New York State that are not pretty flowers, but I also want to encourage people to think about and sort of develop a little bit of a relationship with. And about half of those are grasses, sedges, and rushes. To most people, it's just grass. And so it's sort of challenging. How do you make someone care about grass? Well, this is one species called Bigelow's sedge. It's an alpine obligate species. You're only going to find it in our alpine environments. And this is it flowering. So grasses do flower, and so I'm capturing that in this image here. And the interesting thing about this particular image, when I was shooting this project, I followed all of the principles of the Summit Steward program, meaning I didn't walk on any vegetation or damage anything, and that presented a whole variety of challenges as well. So I was often shooting on this rather large tripod with a horizontal extension arm going out with my camera mounted on the end and my backpack hanging off the other side. And then I was sort of doing the same position, trying to look into the camera and compose and focus without touching the plants. And when I was photographing this Bigelow sedge, I was right off the trail up to the summit of Mount Marcy, that sort of last little climb that you have up to the top. And at least 3 or 4 people sort of walked up next to me and, went like that. I'm like, what are you looking at? And I pointed out to them. And even though that my camera, my lens was just like this far away from that sedge, they couldn't see it. It was something that they never, their eye wasn't even trained to look for. And once I pointed it out, they're like, oh, that's so cool. First, I didn't even know that a sedge flowered, and second of all, I didn't know that these grasses up here are any different than the ones that might be in my yard. And then they started to see them all over the place. And so they started to look at this place or this environment in a different way. This is my favorite alpine grass. It's called alpine sweetgrass. It was also my nemesis. I tried that focus stacking technique on this grass thousands of times. Failed every single time. Couldn't get it to work. And the reason is that it's so dainty that the slightest little wind would make it move. And the parts that I was trying to photograph from the very tip using that technique are also pretty small. So if it moved just a fraction of a millimeter, it threw off the whole process for me. But I was able to capture this sort of more wider angle view of it, again, on one of those days where it was raining on the summit. The last one I'll show you this is deer's hair sedge. You can maybe see a little bit of tufts at the top, also flowering. And this may be one that if you're been up to the alpine environment a few times, you may recognize it. In the fall, it turns that sort of yellowish color and it looks like tufts of deer hair. And there's a lot of it on Algonquin, especially on the summit. It looks like there's just piles of deer hair sticking out of the summit all over the place. And so another alpine sedge. And it's also important to remember that there are more than plants in the alpine ecosystem. This is a little snowshoe hare that I was fortunate enough to capture. and he was not following the principles of the Summit Stewardship Program. He was chowing down on that rare sedge, but that's okay because he's part of that environment up there. I've also seen American marten on the summit quite frequently, and I've seen wet bear prints on the bog bridging right below the summit of Mount Marcy. So there are, a variety of other species of wildlife that are using this environment as well. And then another part of this project was to capture sort of the context of this environment for those that may never get to see it themselves. So the plant images are really looking at the very specifics of this ecosystem, and maybe especially beneficial to you, those that have been there before and understand the context, but for those that may never see it, this is the summit of Algonquin at sunrise, and there is, in the kind of bottom corner there, there's a little bit of cotton sedge in bloom, so those little white tufts. And an additional aspect of this was to try and depict the conditions that these plants have to deal with in order to grow and survive in this environment. So we might not, if you haven't been to the summit of one of these peaks in the winter, you might assume that it's covered in snow, but that really isn't the case most of the time, at least not the entire summit cone. The winds up there whip the snow right off. It's often boilerplate ice or just exposed like it was on this February day. And these sort of little red tufts sticking up, that's some of that diapensia, and there's a lot of the sedges mixed in between. And also, if you've been up to this environment in the winter, you know that you want to have most of your skin covered. It's particularly on a windy day, and not just to protect you from the cold, but to protect you from that snow and ice that's getting whipped across the summit and can really sting when it hits your face or your skin. So think about a plant that needs to take that abuse all winter long. And any sort of woody debris above the summit, or woody material that isn't buried in snow, can actually get sandblasted right away from that action. Sort of the flip side of that, though, is there are other parts of the summits that are completely buried in snow. This is just below the summit of Mount Marcy at sunrise, looking over towards Haystack. And in these areas, we call them snowbank communities. We get a completely different assemblage of plants in these locations, the ones that can't handle sort of the harsh conditions that are on the summit. So, sort of what are the outcomes of all this work? My original intention was to take these photographs, give them to the Mountain Club, give them to other organizations, but also seed them into publications and other locations to try and get the message out about this environment. So before I was done shooting it, I arranged for a feature story in Adirondack Life to be published. That came out, I think, 2 years ago, including the cover photo of the magazine was a shot of the alpine ecosystem on Algonquin. The Adirondack Explorer has published them. They're actually in them. They were in sort of a feature spread in that, and they're also in the most recent edition. If anyone subscribes, keep an eye out. There's a couple of photos in there again. And the bookstore guy. I see a copy of Adirondack Park Angels. Yep, so great book. Encourage you to read it. If you flip it over on the back, one of the photos is on the back of the book there, and I had the honor of having images in that book, which is a collection of essays about the high peaks and organizations and people that have helped protect it. I think I came second to Nancy Battaglia for the number of photos in that book, and I beat Carl Howland, so yes. And all of those, the sales from that book go to the 507 Fund, which is Ed Ketledge's 46er number, 507, who founded the Summit Steward program, and it's a big name in sort of conservation in the Adirondacks, and that fund supports the Summit Stewardship program, so definitely worth a read. And ADK uses the images, and you see them in their newsletters and that sort of thing all the time. So moving on to sort of a different project, and a little bit more recent, this is a project that I just started recently, and I also know a few of you in the room are contributing to this. It's called #ADK 1 Mile. And this is sort of related to the work that Craig mentioned that we were involved with around Boreas Ponds. And the intent of this photography project, and it's meant to be a community project, is to raise awareness about how much of the Adirondack Park is within 1 mile of a public road or snowmobile trail. And so when I got into this, sort of involved myself in the debate about how to manage the Boreas Ponds, the first thing I did was put my science hat on for a moment and did some GIS analysis, Geographic Information Systems. And I looked at the Adirondack Park in terms of the proximity to the nearest public road or snowmobile trail. And when I finished that, this is the map that came out the other end. And the scale here is red is directly adjacent to a road, blue is far away. The farthest you can walk in the Adirondack Park in a straight line into the woods before you start walking out again is just 5.3 miles. Just 5.3 miles. That's really not that far when you think about it. So we think of the park as this vast, remote, wild lands, but it's actually bisected by nearly 7,000 miles of road and snowmobile trail. And so most of the park, 70% of it, is within 1 mile of a public road or snowmobile trail. And this isn't including motorized lakes, which sort of a little bit more difficult to include in this analysis at the first run of it anyways. And only 5% of the Adirondack Park is more than 3 miles from the road, and less than 1/10 of 1% of the park is more than 5 miles from the road. Right? The farthest you can get is 5.3, but greater than 5 to 5.3, less than 1/10 of 1%. Pointer's going to work. And so when the whole Boreas Ponds debate came up, I ran this analysis most specifically to look at the Boreas Ponds, which is right here where I'm circling. That is actually the ponds themselves. If the road to the ponds were kept closed, the ponds themselves would be in the 5% of the park that's greater than 3 miles from the road. They would be one of the largest remote water bodies in the park. You can think of something like, well, it would be larger than Lake Colvin, Duck Hole, it would be kind of similar to the West Canada Lakes area. Like, that's the sort of opportunity we had here. And the north end of the property, just north of the ponds, was, if the road were kept closed, would be in that 1/10 of 1% of the park that's greater than 5 miles from the road, just north of White Lily Pond. It's my belief that roads are good. I drive them all the time. But when we have opportunities to conserve large remote areas, that's extremely beneficial from an ecological perspective, but it's also beneficial from a psychological and emotional perspective to humans. Right? There's not many places in this world where you can go experience true solitude and remoteness. So the Adirondack Park Agency, and just recently the DEC announced their plans for these lands, decided that the Lemire flow, which would have been just shy of that 3 mile mark, would make a good drive-by destination on your way to the pond. So Lemire flow will join the 70% of the park that's within 1 mile of the road, as will this view from Boreas Ponds, and in fact the entire ponds themselves. And so what frustrated me with this process was this belief that someone looked at this map and thought, there's not enough red on there. Right? I mean, that's essentially what we decided, that we needed more roads, more red. We needed to be able to drive to more places. 70% of the park within a mile of a road wasn't enough. 50% of the park is within a half mile of a road. Right? We needed a little bit more. So these places should all join those red areas, and they shortly will. Well, what this project is about is sort of making the statement and raising awareness about how much of the park is within close proximity of a road, and that if we have some sort of problem with access to beautiful views and locations, that I don't think more roads is going to be the solution, right? Here's Blue Mountain Lake, absolutely gorgeous body of water, wonderful place to paddle and camp. It's motorized access. You can launch your boat on it and drive around on it. Beautiful view. Mount Van Hovenberg. It's a 2-mile trail to the summit, but it is within 1 mile of a road. I would argue one of the most astonishing views of the high peaks. In general, this is my rule of thumb. The best views in the Adirondacks are not from the high peaks, they're of the high peaks. That you can get, right? Relatively easy hike up to that location. Mount Joe, another great one with wonderful views. Cobble Lookout in Wilmington, amazing views of everything from Whiteface, which is like over here, across the Sentinel Wilderness and the Jay Wilderness and the Hurricane Mountain Wilderness and the Giant Wilderness across the Ausable Valley within 1 mile of the road. Pretty easy 7/10 of a mile hike to this location. There are even views that I would argue are more astonishing than the view from Boreas Ponds from roadside destinations already that you can get to. This, if you haven't been to this spot, this is the McIntyre Range from Bear Cub Road, driveway down to the Heaven Hill Farm just outside of Lake Placid. Awesome view. Go check it out. The end of Lodge Road would be another great location. I like this one because there's fewer cars pulled over on the side of the road when you're there, and I think the view of the McIntyre Range is better from that sort of side. Pope Bay on Lower Saranac Lake. I took this image from a motorboat. I'm not opposed to motorized use. I just think that when we have the opportunity to keep someplace really remote and wild, we should take it because there's not many of those places left. But an amazing view of the Mackenzie Mountain Wilderness, and this is Mackenzie Mountain. And so anyways, the point of this project is to hopefully raise awareness about how much of the park is within close proximity of road, and therefore how rare really remote places are even here in New York State. So my hope with this is that this isn't just a thing that I do, it's a thing that all of us do. So if you're of the younger generation or you're older and hip and you're on Instagram, use that hashtag ADK1mile, and share your images of these beautiful locations in close proximity to a road. And there are, I don't want to make any promises, but there are sort of publications and people that are interested in doing stories using these photos, and we're looking at ways to map them. If you geotag your Instagram locations, to create a map of all these locations in the Adirondacks so people can see where these places are. So, sort of my last topic, and this sort of came up with the planning committee, maybe is something that people would be interested in. And I know that as soon as I say this word, about half the room is going to do one thing and half the room is going to do another. So, drone. Okay. Drones. Half of you probably were like, cool, drones. I love drones. They're so awesome. I wish I had one, or I have one. And I want to play with it. Things that fly are awesome. The other half of you are probably like, drones. I hate drones. Those stupid, noisy things. I shoot them down with a shotgun. They invade my privacy. I wish that they never existed. I fall somewhere in between. I appreciate that drones are incredibly annoying, potentially an invasion of privacy, but I also think they offer a real opportunity to look at a landscape in a different way. I am a FAA licensed commercial drone operator. With that said, I have advocated for and written about banning drones from wilderness, primitive, and canoe areas in the Adirondacks. I don't think they belong there. I don't think they add any value to those locations, and I think they diminish the wilderness experience that people have in those locations. The regulations on that currently is that it's sort of illegal. I would argue it's illegal. Forest Rangers have issued one ticket that it's illegal to launch or land a drone from those locations because they're considered motorized equipment, and motorized equipment is banned. What is not illegal is to operate a drone from those locations. So the drone can't touch those areas, but the operator can. So legally, with the assistance of a remote observer as a commercial operator, I could leave my drone at the Cascade parking lot, hike up to the summit, have radio communication with someone down there that can see it the whole time with me. I could launch it from me being on the summit. That is how good the technology is these days. I could fly up to the summit, buzz around everyone up there. I could even fly over to Big Slide, check out what the people are doing over there, take some pictures of them, fly back, land the drone, back in the parking lot, hike down, and that would all be totally legal. I have advocated for the DEC to update the regulations to clarify that the operator can also not be in wilderness, primitive, and canoe areas. So all the pictures that you're going to see here were not taken from those areas. One of the, I think, better uses of drones that I've been a part of was this sort of whole issue that rose up at the end of last year with Iowa Pacific deciding that they wanted to turn a dead-end rail line that they had leased into a semi-permanent storage ground for these, I forget the actual number, but these are the oil tankers that, when they get in an accident, blow up entire towns. And so they have been decommissioned from carrying crude oil. And so there's a surplus of these around the nation that folks don't know what to do with because they can't operate them in their intended capacity. They can carry other liquids but not crude oil. And so they're being stored all over the place, and there was several dozen of them placed in the Vanderwacker Wild Forest along the Boreas River. And immediately the local towns, environmental groups, pretty much everyone was opposed to this. They were opposed to this because there was concerns that we would have a many miles long junkyard. I think it was like 24, 25-mile long junkyard of rail cars snaking their way through some of the most beautiful remote locations in the park and directly adjacent to the Boreas River. And there's also concerns with a bridge over the Hudson River that if this line were ever to become active to move tailings out of Tahawas, which was what the original plan was, that bridge would need to see some improvements. But the bridge didn't see improvements before they moved these cars north of it, so there's concerns that that bridge would become compromised and the cars would be stuck up in this location. So that's sort of the story behind the opposition. I had been aware that there were plans to move these into the park. I had been reaching out to folks saying, do you know when they're going to come here, where they're going to be. I found out that they had moved into the Adirondacks, eventually found out their location, hiked out there with a drone to capture these images, and immediately gave them to anyone, really, news, publications, the environmental groups, and said, use them however you want. Take them and use them to tell the story. And quite frankly, if the newspapers wanted to report that this was a good thing, that was their prerogative as well. The Adirondack Council used them quite extensively in a campaign focused on Warren Buffett, who owned the cars. He didn't own the rail line and the operation to put them there, but these are Warren Buffett's tanker cars. And they were successful. Warren actually wrote Willie Janeway a letter saying, thank you for bringing this to my attention. As soon as the weather clears, all of the cars are going to be removed. And so, I'm glad to report that there might be a handful left right now. They're literally, as we speak, being taken out of the park. And the owner of the rail line has sort of said that the opposition and the effectiveness of that letter to Warren Buffett has pretty much ruined his ability to use this as a storage facility moving forward. And there is now renewed talk of using this line for what its original intended purpose was, which was to move the tailings from Tahawas, giant pile of stone you can see from the summit of Mount Marcy out over the course of many years, and then the line will likely be decommissioned after that. Aerial photography also gives us an opportunity to give perspective of a place. This is Mirror Lake in the village of Lake Placid. I do a lot of work on this lake. It is the most heavily impacted water body in the Adirondacks from road salt. And this image sort of helps tell two stories. One, that's because of all the sidewalks and roads surrounding the lake. All of that runs through pipes directly into the lake. The second story is we think of the Adirondacks as sort of immune to these environmental issues because it's protected. Well, North Elba and the village of Lake Placid are surrounded by wilderness, literally on every side. But where there is development, it's concentrated. And that concentrated development can create problems, environmental problems that are very similar to what we would expect in a very urbanized landscape. So Mirror Lake doesn't turn over and mix the way it should every year because of the road salt that's accumulated on the bottom. It's like Italian salad dressing, and there's not enough energy to mix it together. This is White Lily Pond, flows into lower Saranac Lake. I just think it's an incredibly beautiful little water body that is more beautiful when you look at it above. It almost looks like an eye of the Adirondacks peering back at you. It's a kettle pond, or kettle lake. It formed when a giant block of ice was embedded in its parent material when the glaciers receded. When that ice melted, it formed a depression and the pond was formed. There's really no way for the public to see this location, even though it is on state land, because that state land is surrounded by private land. So there's no way to get there. So this is an opportunity for you to appreciate something that you own as a New York State taxpayer, but you will never likely see. This is Upper Saranac Lake. I took this image for the Adirondack Watershed Institute and the Upper Saranac Foundation, and the subject of this image is actually this little dot right here in the middle of the lake. This is a very high-tech piece of equipment that is collecting real-time data on the lake to help them protect Upper Saranac Lake. Every hour, a sensor array is lowered through the water column and measuring water quality parameters all the way through, and then it uploads the data to the cloud, wherever that is. Not these clouds, some other cloud. Also has a weather station and a webcam. Once that gets installed on the lake, which I think is actually happening this week, you can go on a website, you can look at Upper Saranac Lake, you can look at the weather, you can even look at the data that they're collecting if you're so interested. But it helps. This sort of perspective helps them tell their story about the research they're doing to protect this lake. This image is of Little Cherry Patch Pond, right along Route 86, and I took this image to help people think about the interconnectedness between roads and our lakes, rivers, and ponds. So, about 70% of the surface area of ponded waters in the Adirondacks is hydrologically connected to a road. That means if we do unsustainable things on those roads, we have the potential to impact 70% of the surface area of water in the Adirondacks. That's pretty serious. And one of the things that we tend to do a little bit much of is apply salt to these roads in the winter. And 50% of the stream length in the Adirondacks is hydrologically connected to a road. So when we think about what we do on roads, how we maintain them, what we apply to them chemically, what comes off of our vehicles, that is how much of the Adirondack water we are potentially impacting by what we do on our roads. And then the last thing that I have been doing with drones is using them to help plan ecological restoration sites or restoration projects. When you walk up to an Adirondack River like the West Branch of the Ausable, particularly the lower half of the West Branch, or the East Branch of the Ausable, pretty much the entire thing, you may walk up to that and be like, oh, that's a really gorgeous natural river. Often, though, that river has been heavily manipulated over hundreds of years. First, we blasted the crap out of them to prevent log jams from happening. So we got rid of all the large boulders and roughness that existed. And for good reason. We didn't want lumber folks, out there on that log drive trying to break up a jam, because more often than we would like, that ended up with someone losing their lives. And then after we did that, when we were building the Adirondacks, if you needed some clean fill, and not everyone, but a lot of people in the Adirondacks know someone with one of these pieces of machinery, you just went down to your neighbor and said, hey, can you, give me a couple bucket loads of fill out of the river, sometime this summer and dump them on my property for use. And then the last thing that we did is when rivers flooded, our response typically is to go in again with this machinery and dig them out, thinking that that's going to solve the problem. But it doesn't. So this section of the West Branch of the river was over-widened, and as a result, so this is where that restoration is occurring. You can see how the river right through here is wider than it is over here, which is sort of the reference condition for the river. As a result, this big pool that was great habitat in the summer for trout started to fill in with sediment, because when the river gets wider, the water velocity slows down and the river starts depositing sediment. And so we've been using drones to create aerial maps of these locations with incredible detail. And so I'm just going to zoom in on the edge of this map. This is what you would see in like Google Earth or with typical aerial imagery captured from a plane. And this is imagery captured with a drone. Hundreds of photographs, all stitched together, geo-referenced. And so we can create these really detailed pictures of the river. We can measure distances. This isn't the greatest example, but if there's a boulder or a rock we might need to move in the construction phase, we can measure the size of that and say, oh, I need a bigger excavator to pick up that boulder and move it than what we originally planned. We are also using this sort of imagery and technology to remove the 38-foot tall Rome Dam that's on the West Branch of the river just above Ausable Forks. This used to power the J&J Rogers pulp and paper mill, which is just downstream. It doesn't do that anymore. It is actually a hazard to the downstream communities because it's starting to show structural issues that if it fails would create catastrophic flooding. And it also is a complete barrier to fish passage upstream. And so we're capturing this type of imagery to help us plan the engineering of removing this structure. And I don't have a really good way of showing you this on a static slide, but just how we use two eyes to create a 3D environment, we can use drones with one camera to create a 3D model of an environment. If I capture one image from over here and I know exactly where I am and where I'm pointing, and then I move a few feet over and do that again, I can begin to triangulate the location of objects that are in both image. And if I do that hundreds of times, I can create 3D models of that environment. So in this view over here, you'll see some of the little blotches popping through. That's where like the 3D models sort of cut off, but we can go in here and actually measure the height of the trees, the size of the canopy, all with a small drone that you can go buy at Best Buy tonight if you want. So that's sort of the benefits of drone technology and sort of why I think that it is potentially a very powerful tool both for telling stories and then also informing sort of our understanding and restoration work that we're doing. And I think I'm almost pushing my time in. I'm just going to run through a couple more slides and sort of excite you about something that I'm going to be doing this summer. For many years, I've been trying to figure out how to better mesh my work as someone studying water to my work as a photographer. And as I've sort of advanced in my career, particularly in protecting fresh water, I realized that one of the biggest challenges is sort of what I talked about in the beginning, is that people don't have a connection to these places. And I think that the main reason for that is, especially when we compare to oceans, is that when we walk up to the edge of a pond, we see our reflection, or the reflection of the landscape. We don't really gain an appreciation for everything that is happening on the other side of that reflection. We don't ever really connect with that environment. Fishermen or fisher people tend to develop a little bit more of that connection because they're starting to pull stuff out of that other side of that world a little bit more. But sort of the average citizen never experiences that. Even if you paddle on a lake, you generally are looking up, appreciating the beautiful views around it. You're not really thinking of what's going on below your boat. And so I thought to myself, if I can start showing people these environments, maybe like with the alpine plants and some of the other things I've been doing, they'll start connecting with them a little bit more. And I've been on the fence about just like doing underwater photography in the Adirondacks for a couple of reasons. One, I don't know anything about underwater photography. It's not the same thing as shooting landscapes, I can tell you that right now. I know that I know enough that I'll be able to learn it, but I also know that the first images I capture, I'm not going to be satisfied. Maybe other people will think they're cool. And the other thing is that it's really sort of expensive. To put a good camera in a housing costs as much or more as what the camera costs. So there's some of those hurdles to overcome. But mentioned the Patreon community early on. One of the first goals I had up there is if I reached a certain level, I would do this project. And like, I didn't think that I would reach that level very quickly, but I reached it in like a few weeks, and I was like, oh crap. I guess I'm doing this thing. I've been thinking about doing it for years, and I've sort of toyed around with it. So I mean, this image in the background is an image I captured. But so last year, in preparation for this, I started spending a lot of time snorkeling in lakes and streams and rivers around the Adirondacks. And I just had a GoPro with me, and not really to capture images, but a big part of photography is understanding your subject matter. And that's honestly, for me, going to be the biggest hurdle with this, is understanding where to go, what to photograph, when to be there, how to do it, what's going to spook things, what isn't, all those different things. And I know a lot of this because like this is what I study as sort of a profession, but it's a different way of approaching that environment as a photographer. But you know, one of the things I often deal with in my work to conserve lakes is talking to people about large woody debris, basically trees in water. They're incredibly important to the aquatic ecosystem. There is this intimate connection between the land and our lakes and rivers, and yet many cottage owners and camp owners just love to mow everything down between their camp and the lake, and not keep some buffer and some trees along the shore which provide the habitat for the fish and the bugs and the phytoplankton and everything else. Or people freak out when they think of swimming through something like this, right? I know I kind of get squirmy when I'm in it. You feel things touching you all over the place, and your mind thinks that it's like a snapping turtle that's about to devour you, or some large fish that's going to, attack you in some way. But these are incredibly important environments to maintain in our lakes and our ponds. Or high elevation streams. They're actually relatively devoid of life. Really high up, there's not much fish, bugs, or anything in them because they haven't accumulated that energy and that organic matter from the environment to sort of feed the ecosystem. And then as we move downstream, they look entirely different. In this case, one of the reasons this looks different is because there's a road right behind me, and sand and silt and everything is running into this stream. Or what people often also don't realize is underneath bridges and culverts, when we build them, we often leave all kinds of stuff in the bottom of the stream, even in the Adirondacks. Think that maybe this wouldn't be allowed, but the reality is that no DEC official is going to come along with a snorkel mask and stick his face in the water and see all the debris that's left in the stream after that construction is done. And you can see there's all kinds of fabric, there's big pieces of steel and all kinds of stuff that was left behind when this culvert was replaced. So that's sort of my presentation. Thank you for all sitting through the whole thing, and hopefully you were entertained a little bit and informed about some things. And I guess I don't know if we have time for questions or if anyone has any.
Brendan, one thing that I was asked to ask you was if someone wanted one of these photos or some other photos from your website, how would they do that?
Yeah, so I have a pretty unique name. If you Google me, I will be the only person you find. So if you Google Brendan Wiltse, you'll find my website, which is brendanwiltse.com. And there are just hundreds of images on my website that you can order if you want, print, or anything else.
Any other questions for Brendan?
Yeah.
In your study of the Adirondack Lake,
Jack, just since you had a question.
Yep. So she asked if you guys could use my photos in the Genessean, and the answer is yes. Yep. I actually have sort of a relationship with the Adirondack Mountain Club that I've continued, where I will provide the Mountain Club anything and everything they want. You just have to ask. And so what I do tend to tell like other folks in the organization is that it's better to, if you go to my website and find images you want to use, you can save the link and email them to me. When someone asks, can you send me some images of a location, then I have to spend a lot of time like going through and trying to figure out what you want versus you just telling me what you want.
Jack?
in your study of the lakes and ponds of the Adirondack, what have you seen over the past 50 years for the health of those lakes and ponds? With regard to fish population, fish species, acid rain, acidification?
Yeah, so, well, I don't have an complete answer to that, but I will touch on two things. Acid rain, the general story of that in the Adirondacks is that the lakes have showed an incredible amount of chemical recovery. Not every lake, but most of them, their pHs are coming back up and are close to or pretty near sort of pre-industrial pH for those water bodies. What hasn't happened, though, is the biological communities have not responded in kind. And there's a whole variety of reasons why that is. The simplest explanation you can give is if you completely extricated fish from a pond because you acidified it, just by bringing the pH back up isn't going to make this fish all of a sudden appear in that pond again. That's just not how reproduction works and dispersal of species works. So that's sort of the acid rain thing. And of course, there's a kind of sort of increasing concerns right now about some of the pollution controls being loosened on sort of the Midwest coal-burning power plants and what that impact might have. And so there are a lot of us that are in this field are we kind of stopped thinking about pH as much and focusing on other things. We're starting to look at it a little bit more out of concern with what might happen in the future. I hope we don't go back down that road. For the fish populations, the thing that I work on most is brook trout and conserving brook trout. There are only native stream-dwelling trout species. They actually really aren't a trout, they're a char, but a rainbow trout, brown trout, those are foreigners that we brought in from other locations. Great fish if you like fishing, they do a little bit better in some environments. Our focus is understanding and conserving brook trout, and the first thing that we need to do in order to achieve that is understand where they are and how to prioritize the protection of very specific locations. And that's where we're doing that. What I mentioned environmental DNA. We're hoping to sample hundreds, if not thousands, of locations in the park in this manner to create a map of where these fish are.
Are there any areas experiencing phytoplankton blooms?
Yeah, they're not in sort of the Ausable watershed where I work a lot. Lake Champlain has a particularly large number of issues associated with that. Lake George does to some extent as well, and they're concerned that they're kind of getting to a point where that really might be a larger problem. Governor Cuomo did, though, just recently announce a pretty significant issue to address harmful algal blooms, referred to as HABs, across the state. And the focus in the Adirondacks is really on Lake Champlain and Lake George right now. I'm sure there's some other water bodies that maybe have localized issues